All right. So last time that we were talking about stuff, we talked about how Meiji was quickly advancing up the technology levels of Japan. So we talked about that last time. So they kind of quickly came up and they were getting some quick amount of tech. And after they had done some quick amount of technology and gotten kind of advanced, the next thing that ends up happening is now they got, now they got an army, they got a navy, you got to do something with it. Just can't let that stuff sit around. That'd be silly. So they decided to invade somewhere. And where they decided to invade? Well, they decided to invade Korea. So Japan's going to invade Korea. Now, this time period, Korea is owned by China. So China does own Korea. They also own Taiwan. And, well, Japan's going to invade Korea, then Taiwan. Not mainland China, just Korea and Taiwan down here. The name of this war is the Sino-Japanese War. Sino is referring to the Chinese. I'm going to make a bullet and write down Sino-Japanese War. So Sino-Japanese War is between the Japanese and the Chinese for control of the Korean Peninsula. After you got that, go ahead and make a 1. We're going to make 1. We're going to write down Korean Peninsula. So make 1 and write down Korean Peninsula. So the Korean Peninsula, why was that important? Well, we talked about before. Actually, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but in the 1500s, about in the 1590s, Japan does try to invade Korea, and it doesn't go well, and Japan is unable to take Korea. So this is the second time that Japan tries to take over Korea. And it's just kind of a natural place for Japan to expand. You can see how Japan's, right here, Korea's right there. It's right next to Japan. It's the closest kind of land body to it. And if you can get control of Korea, then that gives you access to other places as well. So the Japanese show up. They quickly destroy the Chinese Navy. So Japan's Navy kind of destroys the Chinese Navy pretty quickly. And this allows Japan to kind of get a foothold and some control in Korea. So they will get in the area. They'll take over Korea pretty easily. They'll destroy the fleets of the Chinese that the Chinese try to put up against them. And they're going to end up pushing all the way over to kind of this area. So they kind of take over kind of this part right here of Korea. So they kind of take through all of this part. That also gets them a little bit of a foothold into this area right here called Manchuria. That area of Manchuria is important because there's a lot of natural resources in Manchuria. So it gets them a little bit of a foothold there. Not a complete foothold. They don't get control over the entire Manchuria area, but does give them a little bit of territory. So go ahead and make a 2. We're going to write down gained a foothold in Manchuria. And again, Manchuria is just important because it has a lot of natural resources. We'll talk more about how Japan will try to expand into Manchuria in the future. So after getting a foothold in Manchuria and defeating the Chinese in both Korea and in Taiwan, they sign a peace deal with China that gives Japan control of those areas. So Japan defeats China, gains control of those areas. And now that Japan has defeated somebody else, remember they were getting bullied kind of by the United States and Britain and France because they showed up, shot some cannonballs in the harbor in the 1850s. And now that we are, 40 years after that, now Japan has kind of advanced up. Now that Japan has defeated China, a lot of nations started to take notice. Britain started taking notice, and Britain actually makes makes a military alliance with Japan 10 years after they fought against the Chinese in 1904. So make a 3. Write down Japan signed an alliance with Great Britain 10 years later in 1904. So Japan is actually going to become buddies with Britain, even though Britain, was one of the nations that showed up and shot cannonballs in their harbors and forced them to sign trade deals they didn't want to sign. But now that Japan has kind of shown that they're a strong nation, Britain's like, well, we want these guys on our side. So they made friends with them. So they became allies with them. So the next thing we're going to talk about is the Russo Japanese War. So next thing we're going to talk about is the Russo Japanese War. And the Russo Japanese War is a war between Russia and Japan. Go ahead and make a bullet and write down Russo Japanese War. So bullet, Russo Japanese War. So the Russo Japanese War is between Japan and Russia. All right, so that's what the Russo Japanese War is between. So it's in between Japan and Russia. And in Asia, after Japan defeats China, the balance of power in Asia had changed. No longer was Japan considered to be a weak nation. They were considered to actually have some pretty good military strength now that they had defeated the Chinese. And it was kind of a debate about who was stronger in Asia. Was it Russia or was it Japan? Okay, clearly, those two were the two strongest nations in the area by the time we get into the 1900s. So there's kind of a big issue between the two there because, obviously one is stronger than the other. Gotta make a one and write down Russia and Japan were major powers and enemies. So Russia and Japan were major powers and enemies. So they were major powers, but they were also going to become enemies, obviously, because they're going to fight a war against each other. And the Russo-Japanese War between Russia and Japan, it takes place when Japan launches a surprise attack on the Russians. So Japan's actually going to initiate the war. So Japan will initiate the war by attacking the Russians off the coast of Manchuria at a place called Port Arthur. So I'll show you in a picture. So Port Arthur is right over here. That's where Japan's going to attack first. Okay, so that's where Japan's going to go for the Russo-Japanese War. So they're going to go right there, bam, and attack Port Arthur right away. The reason why they're attacking Port Arthur is because Port Arthur is where Russia has their Pacific fleet. So Russia has two fleets, a Baltic fleet, which is over in Europe, and then they have their Pacific fleet, which is on the Asia side of their empire because Russia stretches pretty far. So they have kind of two major fleets. And Japan's going to attack that fleet at Port Arthur first. That's the first fleet they're going to attack right away. Going to make it two and write down Japan launched a surprise attack on Russian ships anchored off of Manchuria. Up here in the picture, this is a political cartoon. And in this political cartoon, what's happening is that you have a Russian sailor here. So there's a Russian sailor. And this is a hand that's labeled Japan. And the hand that's labeled Japan is using a thumb screw on the Russian sailor. What's a thumb screw? A thumb screw was a common punishment at the time period for sailors. You basically have this bar over the person's thumbs, and the person's thumbs are over kind of this razor teeth stuff, and you screw it down, and then it pushes the thumbs down onto the razor teeth. All right, so that's the thumb screw. As I said, it's a common punishment this time period for sailors. So Japan attacks the Russian fleet at Port Arthur. When the Russian fleet is attacked at Port Arthur, the Russian fleet is destroyed. It tries to move out of Port Arthur. It doesn't go well. Gets destroyed. The other Russian fleet I talked before, the Baltic fleet, eventually it arrives as well, but it had to go, around Africa and so forth to get over to Asia. So by the time the Baltic fleet gets over there, the Pacific fleet is already destroyed. Japan then fights against the Baltic fleet, destroys the Baltic fleet as well. With both the fleets destroyed, there wasn't a whole lot Russia could do, and the area is taken over by Japan. So Japan then takes control of that area. We're going to make a 3, and we're going to write down Russia, fleet destroyed. So Russia, fleet destroyed. Write that down for number 3. So Russia, fleet destroyed. And with the Russian fleet destroyed at that point in time, Japan was then in control of Port Arthur. I think Japan also took a little bit more control of a little bit of Manchuria territory. Again, not the entire thing, just a little bit more, and kind of pushed the Russians off of that area. The war is concluded when President Theodore Roosevelt, who's here in the picture, so that's Theodore Roosevelt in the picture right there, when he has a peace meeting between the Russians and the Japanese. That's supposed to be the Russian Tsar there on the left. That's supposed to be the Japanese emperor on the right. That's this is a political cartoon again. So the two of them meet in New Hampshire. They have a meeting there, and that's when they sign a peace deal, which is negotiated as well by Theodore Roosevelt. You'll see on the Russian Tsar right there, he has a double cross on the symbol there. So Russians are Christians, but they're Eastern Orthodox Christians, basically the eastern part of Christianity. And their symbol, instead of being one cross, like what is your standardly would see for Christianity, instead it's a double cross. So you kind of see it's a cross, and there's like a little smaller cross above that cross. And you'll notice on the Japanese emperor, he has the kind of rising sun flag on his cape there. Go ahead and make it 4. And we're going to write down peace treaty between Russia and Japan. So Japan was getting bullied kind of by people. They built up an army. They built up a navy. They defeated China. Now they defeated Russia. And they have control of Korea now, as well as some territory in Manchuria. And we'll see that Japan's ambitions to take over more territory isn't over yet. But that will be next time.